The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
Most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spin-off or wherever you get your podcasts. Tēnā koutou katoa. This is Gone By Lunchtime, extra bonus, very special edition. My name is Toby Manhire, and with me today I have none other than the man you may know from the Morning Bulletin, Alex Braae. Kia ora, Alex. How are you?
Good morning. I'm good, thank you.
Annabelle and Ben will be back with me on the morning after the election, which is this Saturday, unless they extend it again, which they probably will, let's face it. And this is a special edition for those of you who are just insatiable in your thirst for politics. And I wanted to talk to Alex because he's been on a pretty extraordinary mission around the country and he's learnt a lot. And it's just fair that he shares those learnings, ladies and gentlemen, with you. First of all, I want to say thanks to Flick Electric for their support over many years for Spin-off Politics. You can join up to them by clicking through on any page. I wanted to say thank you to Spin-off members who allow me and Alex and the rest of us to do what we do. And I want to thank Alice Webb-Liddell, who is helpfully making this all work technically today, as well as being an important spirit force in the room and in the office more generally. Alex, I'd like you to retrace the itinerary in the I've Been Everywhere man. I want you to go Woodville, Dargaville, Lumsden, Katikati, Nativesby, Cambridge, Potter. Can you do that?
I didn't actually go to any of those places,
okay,
as far as I know. No, okay. I mean, it was a pretty crazy journey, actually. I went all over the country and looked high and low, but I just couldn't find the bad boys of Brexit anywhere.
Oh,
bad boys. So it's disappointing.
That's because they were probably nestled behind the Ohakune carrot.
Yeah, wherever they could create chaos. Probably there.
Camped behind the Mosgiel sign. I mean, they move in mysterious ways, the bad boys, such that you can't. I mean, like for example, the late surge from New Zealand First. Not many people can see that either.
No. Who will see that coming? I suppose only them. But no, what I've actually been doing is a large road trip for the election. Basically. Juicy gave us a van to drive around in, and Z Energy gave us some petrol money to actually make the van run. So we're very grateful to both of them. And over the course of it, I actually wrote this out because there's quite a few of them.
Have you written down the itinerary?
I have.
Can you do it? I mean, you don't have to do it in the song, but I think to get a sense of
some of it would flow as a song.
Well, give it a go. Give it a go. Actually, now that you mention it. Not many people would necessarily pick this from your Bulletin persona, but you have been posting on social media.
Once.
Well, once is, I mean, once, but sometimes when one thing is so powerful, it can in some ways be more than, it can be almost a singularity. You posted a picture of yourself singing, playing guitar, and in the office, you should have been seeing the scenes in the office when Alex Braae, it was like, eat it, Jack Tame. Honestly, this was a huge moment. Alex Braae, a man not necessarily taking to performative gestures, suddenly proving that he is a singer-songwriter in the mould of Leonard Cohen or Llewellyn Wainwright. It was extraordinary.
Look, few people know this about me, but But journalism was actually something that I failed into as a fallback option from a previous attempt at being a jazz musician for a career.
Amazing.
So the world of media is lucky or unlucky depending on your point of view. That there's not really any money.
Well, I don't see any reason why you can't fuse the two, beginning now with your musical rendition of the Alex Braae Bulletin on the Road itinerary.
I don't think I'm actually going to sing this, but it was basically the first leg was Mata Mata, Whakatane, Taupo, Martin, Wellington, then back up to Auckland because COVID broke out again, and so they delayed the election, and then headed out again to Taupo, Inglewood, Levin, Martinborough, Nelson, down the west coast, Gore, Dunedin, Lincoln, Christchurch, and then a massive journey back up the country, which actually included a really lovely night camping out at the Matairi Cozy Club.
Oh.
Sort of about half an hour.
Inside or outside?
Outside. Outside. No, they just had a yard out the back where you just had to pay a donation.
Oh, nice.
And so you could just have a nice night drinking with the lads and watching the rugby, and then go and sleep in a van.
Oh, that's the dream. Living the dream.
It was beautiful.
There were a couple of nights though when you were fairly confident you were going to be murdered.
Yes. Well, there was one at a campsite not too far out of Murchison where there was literally no one else in the entire campsite except for a mysterious campfire in the distance. I did not go and investigate. I mean, I know I was meant to be sort of doing the intrepid reporter thing, but it just had that vibe, real Twin Peaks vibe.
You mentioned that you went out twice, because obviously the what we call the August resurgence, is that what we call it, happened? And you were in Taupo at the time, as I recall. Was there a difference in terms of the natures of the campaign, that first bit you got, and then when you went back out there, that was discernible? Yeah,
well, a lot of the events on the second time around were actually held at level 2. So they had a sort of weird vibe to do with them. I had a long chat at a debate in Levin with the new Conservative candidate there, who was wearing a mask, but while we were talking, his mask kept on falling off his face, and it was incredibly hard not to laugh while talking to him. But I mean, I think it's fair to say the electorate the second time around was probably a bit wary of it all.
Yeah.
A bit less of a sense of, this is going to be fun and exciting, an election campaign coming up, we're going to all get amongst it. It was more a sense of, we're doing this again.
One of the reasons that we were keen for you to do this and that you were keen to do this is because it's very easy to get caught in bubbles and covered in media coverage generally, and politics, and even in campaigns. You might be travelling the country, but if you're travelling the country adhered to a campaign, then whether or not you're really getting a kind of cross-section or a taste of what's going on around the country, what did you find as you toured New Zealand was noticeably outside the bubbles that we normally live in?
Well, in a rural sense, I think guns were a big thing that people were talking about.
Yeah.
There was a big sense among some of the rural people I talked to that the government, in changing the gun laws, had really misunderstood the nature of rural gun ownership, both in a sort of hobby sense and also a utility sense. And these were people who very much saw themselves as totally law-abiding citizens who happened to own these weapons for legitimate reasons, who were sort of made criminals if they didn't hand them in. And in fact, a few people sort of said, we handed some of them in and not others. So, I think that was probably something that came up. And also 1080. I mean, we sort of forget how massive a deal 1080 is in the particularly rural parts of the country. And I wonder if there's maybe a little bit of a sense of a different mindset. Perhaps people in cities perhaps see nature as somewhere else that they go out to, as opposed to rural people or provincial people who are much more in the natural world for their day-to-day life. And in that sense, I mean, you know, obviously the Department of Conservation has very good reasons for using 1080. They've got a very strong evidence base for it, but something about the idea of going out and putting poison into nature just really, really rubs a lot of people up the wrong way and made them very, very angry.
So these are things I assume that were sort of cropping up at the debates you went to as well. And what was the response from the parties? We'll get to the smaller parties in a second, but as far as the major parties are concerned, how do they respond to those concerns?
Well, probably the biggest ones would have been two debates on the West Coast that I went to, in which pretty much all of the candidates talked about basically how their personal view on 1080 was that they didn't like it. In fact, the Green candidate even talked about how he found 1080 abhorrent, was his word. But from the big parties at least, there was a general sense that, well, you know, we don't necessarily like it, but we think it's the best option, and so we're going to keep using it for now. But they were also all keen to talk about investments that have been made in alternatives to 1080, in sort of phasing it out if possible. Among some of the smaller parties, there was also a huge appetite for setting up some sort of possum fur industry, or trapping, or you know, getting people who are unemployed out into the bush and doing make-work schemes in that way, basically. I'm not sure if the economic case is quite there for that yet, but there's certainly an appetite to do something other than 1080.
And presumably, as it was everywhere, COVID was a pervasive issue at these meetings. I mean, some communities have been hit harder than others. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. In Kaikoura, which I don't think I actually included that in the rundown. I just stopped there for a night, basically, and they were talking about how 90% of the town's visitors pre-COVID had been international. And so this is also a town that's coming off an earthquake, I want to say 4 years ago. Was just starting to recover, sort of. The road up the coast is still absolutely, you know, you can get through it, but the road is basically very, very slow in some parts, because within 50k of Kaikoura itself, there's probably about 12 spots of roadworks at any given time. And there was a real grimness to it in that sense. And in other parts of the country where farming is the economic base, hadn't really mattered all that much. I think as well, when it comes to the COVID stuff, it basically, one of the things I was trying to think about while I was out was the sort of way that that Labour's extremely high polling since the COVID crisis started. You know, what was actually behind that?
Yeah.
And there was one quite amazing moment in a debate in Martinborough in which Kieran McAnulty, who's Labour's candidate, he basically didn't bother talking about New Zealand First or National or the Greens or anything like that. He directed all of his attacks basically at the Advanced New Zealand candidate, who obviously their policy is to repeal the COVID-19 response bill. They, you know, have hard to pin down views exactly, but some people
this
in advance would...
This is the party co-led by Billy TK and Jamie Lee Ross.
Yeah, I think if you asked them flat out, is COVID a hoax, they would say no, but if you interrogated that a bit further, then you would probably get somewhere in terms of not thinking it's a particularly big deal.
And provided a warm nest for conspiracy theorists.
Exactly. And McAnulty absolutely brought the house down by... He was getting a bit of heckling from a couple of Advanced New Zealand supporters in the audience, and he got up to speak, and he built up and built up and built up, and then while he was doing that, the rest of the room at large was really starting to get in behind him, and you could hear the murmurs breaking out. And then he concluded by saying, and we kept the country safe by listening to experts, not by reading conspiracy theories on Facebook. And the room just erupted, as it were. And it
erupted in
applause.
In applause.
In applause. Yeah. And it was one of those moments where I think for Labour in this election, they've managed to run very well on the mantle of being the representative of the responsible parties of government. Yeah. I mean, you see it all the time in the sort of advertising that Grant Robertson's doing at the moment as well, where he's making quite explicit pitches to former voters of Key and English and all of that.
Yeah.
But the fact that McAnulty was basically able to turn the room over to his side by saying that the real opposition in his the way that he was characterising it was Advance New Zealand versus Labour, that was, I think, a particularly clever bit of politics and one that was probably quite a unifying bit of politics for the people who were in that room at the time.
Interesting. And you attended a bunch of these debates. You've written about a lot of them on thespinoff.co.nz. Just search for Alex Braae. I'm not joking. They're excellent reads.
Yeah, well, thanks.
Give us a. You mentioned that debate in Martinborough. Give us another one that's going to linger in your memory for years to come, for whatever reason. Something that sticks out.
Well, I won't talk about one that I've written because I would just want to shout out to the Aotearoa Church in Dunedin, which was. That was Aro Valley Community Centre level of iconic election debate. It was really well done, very funny, really good time. But my favourite one, though, was probably held in Punakaiki, which is a small tourism village on the west coast. You might have heard of the Pancake Rocks. And it was held in the dock workshop at level 2. So they spaced it out, but they managed to get close to 100 people in, and the candidates stood on a box to speak, and there were tools hanging off the walls, and there were 12 candidates, so it was a totally wild contest of ideas, and the ACT candidate spent his entire speech talking about mining rather than party policy, and the money-free party was represented, and if you're into minor parties, that's one of those real deep cuts, which is quite exciting. And there was a really good sense, I think, of people who wouldn't necessarily. It's a small, close-knit community, and people who wouldn't necessarily have agreed with each other, but that is their community, and they all came together for that particular event, and it was a real. It was a sunny Sunday afternoon, and it felt like a real moment in kind of the social calendar of Punakaiki for this year. And I just thought it was fantastic.
So you came away from that feeling quite positive about the state of things.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
Which is, because it's not going great on the West Coast at the moment. But it felt like, all of the we'll just make do with what we've got. They had a dock workshop, so they made do with that. They had a box for people to stand on, so they'd make do with that. There are some pretty shit economic situations coming up for the West Coast at the moment, but you got a real sense of it that, well, they'll find a way to get through it and make do.
Kia ora, I'm Sophie.
And I'm Simon.
And I'm Alice, and together we host the Spin-Off's food podcast, Dietary Requirements.
Join us each month as we explore a vast culinary landscape. From the gourmet
ooh la la
to your more hearty tucker.
Kiwi onion dip, anyone?
Everything's on the table in Dietary Requirements.
Subscribe wherever you listen to all your other favourite podcasts.
You mentioned the minor parties, and alongside jazz music and sleeping outside cosmopolitan clubs, minor parties is truly one of your favourite things in the world. I'm not joking about that. It's very cool as well. You have a profound fascination with the mechanics and the personalities in minor parties. So I'm curious to know how those parties manifest themselves in parts of the country that are less populated, are they more prominent? Who are the characters? What are the issues? How did you encounter the smaller parties on your journey?
Well, for any watcher of minor parties, Nelson is really the place to be. It's where the Outdoors Party co-leader Sue Gray is based, and she's having a real crack at winning the seat off Nick Smith this year, which could happen.
Surely not. Couldn't happen.
It probably couldn't, but she's got a lot of signs around town.
Yeah.
That's basically
She's a very vocal online personality as well, isn't she?
To a degree. Her issues are sort of around what you'd call bodily autonomy issues. So
I thought she was quite into 1080 as well.
Well, that is a bodily autonomy issue, because if you're connected to nature and they're poisoning, as the argument goes, as it were. Okay. But, vaccinations and 5G interrupting your brainwaves, or I didn't quite catch the exact point about 5G that made it dangerous. So that would be one of them. I would say that in terms of the minor parties, it was pretty incredible to see the spread of new Conservative candidates around the country. I mean, it's one of those bizarre pieces of trivia, but they are the only party apart from Labour that's running in all 72 general and Māori electorates.
Yeah,
and
fascinating, right?
That's kind of incredible. And they had an immense number of signs out around the country, absolutely immense. Probably slightly fewer than them were the Advanced New Zealand signs, but they were very prominent as well.
Right.
In a lot of the smaller towns. I would wager possibly in the sort of way that that New Zealand First signs would have used to have been prominent in that sense, but didn't. There were heaps.
I was up in Northland, which I think you might have neglected on this trip.
I did. I figured everyone else would be looking at Northland because of the excitement of that seat.
Well, I was up there for a few days, and there were a lot of Billy TK and Advanced signs, and a lot of one-party signs as well.
Yes, Vote Kingdom.
Vote Kingdom.
Yeah, actually, I suppose.
I was in Taupo the other day, and there was a Mr. Coffin who was standing for King. All felt deeply rapture reading Mr. Coffin and Kingdom, and
go right through the top of it.
Yeah,
almost. I mean, I think the One Party are a really interesting political movement in that they're very genuinely bicultural in a way that I think previous iterations of explicitly Christian parties haven't necessarily been. And I don't know if it's going to go anywhere for them this election. I think they're probably going to finish on about 0.3, 0.4 or thereabouts. Yeah. But there will be a lot of voters out there. And this is probably another one where, I mean, when I went to go and see the One Party, it was in Martin, and we were hosted there for a porphyry by a local Pentecostal church who, I think for a lot of people in that sort of quite hard-edged form of Christianity, the message that they're trying to push, that, there's only one vote that you can make that will please God, will actually be quite a potent one. So, that's probably a small share of the existing Christian population who are going to hear that message. But for them, it could definitely resonate.
It's going to be interesting, isn't it, after the election? A number of factors that are in play, including the likely exit from Parliament of New Zealand First, and potentially the disintegration of New Zealand First. Let's face it, they've had one leader for 27 years.
Yeah.
That's a possibility. We don't know. Maybe someone else would emerge leader. You've got issues within the National Party. We'd already had murmurings of a Christian right party splitting off that with Ngaro.
That's the other amazing
all these things.
I mean,
all
Ngaro
these things
was approached by the One Party to be their leader, and he turned them down.
Yeah.
And that was part of the genesis of the One Party, is that they said, "Oh, we're going to have to lead ourselves."
But after the election, I wonder whether, and this is speculation, of course, but with all the different moving parts, Advance, Public Party, or if they can coalesce in their own way, not in a not in a kind of negotiations coalition way, but if they can coalesce, it feels like it's a good time with a strong leader to actually create something that can have an impact in a parliamentary sense.
Quite possibly, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that was definitely what the New Conservatives were looking to do maybe a year and a half ago, and then we had some of their momentum, I think, got taken away by the formation of Vision New Zealand, which doesn't appear to have really gone anywhere. But then to have the one-party form... Yeah, Hannah Tamaki's party. To then have the one-party form as well, and to also have Advance New Zealand, who have turned into something of a juggernaut, that's put a dent in their potential voter base, which has probably kept them away from the cusp of 5%, which would have then given a lot of, potentially sympathetic voters a good reason to go.
Some momentum in the last fortnight, if you're sort of there or thereabouts, as we saw when Colin Craig in that one of those car crash campaigns got sort of around close to sort of on the edge of 4, and then there was a scandal in the week before, and
fell away.
It didn't quite ever get there.
And I think, I mean, it's probably tempting from the outside to look at Advance New Zealand as being that vehicle that does manage to coalesce all of the other parties around them, in part because, well, some of the other parties say their manifesto is basically entirely made up of cherry-picking what already existed from a range of other parties. Except at the same time, within that space, definitely among the party leadership of other parties, and probably among a fair bit of the rank and file as well, there's just a huge amount of mistrust for Te Kahika and Jamie Lee Ross. And they don't see them as being people that they're comfortable having leading their particular movements. And so I think that's going to be something that holds back any sort of coalescing around it.
Leadership is critical.
Leadership is critical, and personality politics matters a lot.
Yeah. We're going to have you in Spin-Off Towers on Saturday night watching lots of those interesting seats and the small numbers around the smaller parties and how they fare and where they're targeting. Are there any particular seats that are exciting you at the moment?
Yeah, a couple. I would say one of them would be the East Coast, I think. And I met the national candidate Tanya Tapsil in Whakatane on the first leg. Yeah. And in any other year, I think she would absolutely walk it. Coming in as a popular district councillor, replacing Anne Tolley, who is a very popular local MP, except, Kiri Tapu Ellen is a very strong candidate as well, and she's done an immense amount of work on the ground over the last 3 years, and also has the benefit of this massive swing to Labour to work with. So that'll be an interesting seat to watch. Wairarapa will be very, very interesting to see. At this stage, I would pick McAnulty to win it, in part because Nationals picked a pretty good candidate for that seat if you're a farmer. His name's Mike Butterick, and he was the co-founder of that group 50 Shades of Green last year, who are very much against conversion of farmland to pine forest. And that's been a particularly live issue around the Wairarapa, where there are a whole lot of stations that have been sold up for pine, and towns have lost employment. They've lost, in some cases, school teachers who haven't had enough kids to teach anymore as a result. But I don't know if Butterick will necessarily speak to people outside of the farming community in quite the same way. And then you've also got Ron Mark, who is running to win that seat. Yeah. A long shot, to be sure, but he is a good defence minister by all accounts, and he is well liked, well respected, local mayor of Carterton.
Could be the next leader of New Zealand First. A very good shout at that.
And I think for him, it's sort of perhaps the really interesting part of that race is where he ends up taking votes from. And if it ends up being that he takes a whole lot of votes off Kieran McAnulty, then Butterick could definitely slip in. Yeah.
And to finish even a creditable third, but to finish second would put him in a very strong position to make an argument that he's the guy to take over New Zealand first if there was a vacancy, isn't it?
I think the other really interesting seat that I've seen is probably Christchurch Central, which is
really? We didn't put that on a list of the seats to watch.
No, it just occurred to me right then. But I went to go and see a debate for that seat, and it's got,
isn't that a slam dunk for Duncan Webb now?
It should be. It really should be. He's, he's seemingly a reasonably prominent local personality, having done a lot of legal work around the earthquake recovery. But National's candidate is very, very strong. He's a guy called Dale Stevens, former police officer, former businessman. I think he might have been on the telly for a while. Very, very... it just comes across as very approachable, very likable, obviously intelligent, manages to project that sort of compassionate conservatism kind of image that some would say the National Party should be going for more of, and others would say that that's not really the direction that they've gone in.
Yeah. Well, I guess their problem is to bring it back to the kind of Route 1 politics is that I don't know where Mr. Stevens is on the list, but their problem is that they're not going to be bringing in that new talent. We saw that with
a lot of it.
The Tanya Tapsell, who you mentioned.
She's way down.
A Māori woman in her 20s, well-respected, political experience. She's if Kiritapu Ellen wins, which she's likely to, then she's not getting into Parliament.
Yeah. And I think that's potentially a huge risk for National is that they keep their safe seats and they don't end up with those new MPs in who could theoretically even be future ministers or future leaders.
Yeah, maybe they end up being that small conservative party that we were talking about emerging. I'm sure that won't happen. Hey, listen, thanks for chatting today. Give us a overview, give us a parting thought. What have you learned, Alex Braae, while travelling the length and breadth of this great nation, Aotearoa?
I suppose, well, look, I love democracy, basically. One of the biggest things that's come out of this is, I guess, what an election campaign is really like in practice. People gather with their neighbours in halls and churches with a whole lot of people they definitely disagree with, and they have to talk to them and they have to argue with them and they have to really break down those bubbles that we sort of talk about forming around social media, and they're sitting right in front of the people who want to govern them, and they're right up close to them, and they can heckle them and ask questions of them. And it's, at the end of it, they all walk out with the exact same amount of say as each other. And that's kind of a beautiful and fragile and precious thing. And I think the thing that's come out to me really strongly is that it's a contract. It's people think about democracy as something that happens once every 3 years, and we're probably somewhat guilty of that as well because we get into election fever. But it's got to be an ongoing process. The people who have become politically engaged through this election campaign, they need to really stay involved, I think, and they need to keep making demands on those people who seek to represent them and who would go down to Wellington and, say that they're their voice. But, I mean, one of the things that I've been stewing on over the last month, I've had a lot of time in the Juicy to think, and I really think that we get the governments that we deserve, and an engaged and informed citizenry gets a responsive government, and an apathetic and disengaged public gets governments that don't give a shit about them. So I think what people really need to do is, if they've been out to an election debate or they've asked a question of one of their candidates or had any involvement whatsoever in politics over the election campaign, keep on top of the politicians and never let them forget that you're holding up your end of the bargain as the public as well.
I can't think of better words to lead us into Election Day, Saturday. From 7 p.m, we will be online. I'll be there, Alex will be there, and a whole host of spin-off experts and writers and analysts and videographers. What's a videographer?
Not me.
Illustrators, chefs, candlestick makers. We'll be there. Check us out, spinoff.co.nz. Thanks for coming in, Alex. Thanks
for
Alice.
having me, and thanks, Alice.
Thanks all.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBet.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at The Spin-Off. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spin-Off member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate. The Spin-Off Podcast Network.